Hello everyone. So we have come again with a new video from the channel Meninges. Today we are going to discuss about a very common lung disease, that is tuberculosis. So as we all know, tuberculosis as a disease, it is very much common in countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, in several African countries. So what is the reason mainly behind this TB being such a common disease in countries like India, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, or we can say certain African countries. So, main reason for this it being the poverty, overcrowding, and the poor hygienic and the poor uh, control of several communicable diseases like TB. So, let us in this video mainly we are going to discuss the main points regarding TB. In further videos, we will discuss the how to come to a proper diagnosis and what are the treatment guidelines that are presently being followed guidelines about TB. So, starting with this part, that is the basic introduction about what is called as TB. So, here we're going to see the main points. So, if we see TB it is a very much it is a it is a communicable, it is a chronic, and it is a granulomatous disease that can affect any organ, mainly the lungs. So here comes the different types of tuberculosis. That is, tuberculosis it can be divided into two types on the basis of what structure it is affecting. When it affects any organ of the body, when it affects any organ of the body, it will be called as extrapulmonary TB. And when it will be affecting the lungs, it will be called as the pulmonary tuberculosis. Okay. Now coming on to the agent of what is the disease, that is the TB. If we see the agent, the main agent for this is the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. That is a Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So mostly TB is caused by two organisms or two strains of Mycobacterium. That is the Mycobacterium tuberculosis hominis and the Mycobacterium bovis. So out of these two, Mycobacterium tuberculosis hominis, it is a human strain, it is the most commonly agent causing TB. Next being the Mycobacterium bovis, it is also a common agent, but not as much common as TB, not as much common as Mycobacterium tuberculosis hominis. And in recent scenario, if we see what is practice nowadays is that before consuming milk, what we do is that we boil the milk. As a result of which, infection by Mycobacterium bovis is not so much common in nowadays in present scenario. If you see. Next is this about this Mycobacterium. If we see this organism, Mycobacterium, it is an acid fast. Now, what is the reason for this Mycobacterium being called as acid fast? Now, always remember that if an organism is called as acid fast, the reason behind is that this Mycobacterium, if we try to stain it using the normal stains or dyes, we cannot stain it because it will not take the color. Now, what is the reason for not being successfully staining these organisms is that we have a acid called as mycolic acid present in the cell membrane. Now, for this presence of mycolic acid, this Mycobacterium are acid fast. Now, these bacteria are called as acid fast bacilli, commonly called as AFB. Now, there is one such stain which is used to stain these organisms, that is Zeden stain or this Z laser staining. If we see the epidemiology of TB, as before the starting of the lecture only I told that this TB is very much common in countries where there is poverty, where there is overcrowding, and there is risks of certain chronic debilitating illnesses like diabetes, HIV, hypertension, etc., etc. Now, what is the reason for this HIV being a risk factor for TB? As we know in HIV, what happens is that when an individual gets infected by HIV or human influenza virus, there is what happens is that that person is severely immunocompromised. That person is severely immunocompromised. As a result of which, as a result of which, opportunistic infections का risk तो बढ़ जाता ही है. In addition to that, TB is the most common infection that is caused in cases of HIV infected patients. if we see the 2023 data, that is the latest data available, the incidence of TB in India is 27.8 lakh cases. It's not a very much small number, it's a very huge number, and it's a very concerning number. Now, moving on to the next part, there is the transmission. How it is transmitted? There is three methods or three routes by which it can be transmitted, which can be remembered by the mnemonic that is I3. Now, what does this I3 stands for? I3 stands for inhalation, ingestion, and inoculation. Out of this, the inhalation is the most common mode of transmission of TB, and then ingestion, and the last being the inoculation. Now, inoculation is very rarely, but it is not that it cannot be caused, but inoculation is very rarely caused, and most common being the inhalation route. Now, moving on to the pathogenesis, that's how is this TB caused? If you see the pathogenesis, mainly there is two simultaneous immunological responses are present, which results in the pathogenesis of tuberculosis or the progression of TB infection. Now, what are those two immunological responses? They are CMI or the cell-mediated immunity. The next is the type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. Now, here, this type 4 hypersensitivity reaction, this type 4, this is a very important question that can come from here is that what type of hypersensitivity reaction is associated with TB? It is type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. It is a type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. Okay, it is a type 4 hypersensitivity reaction that we must remember here. Okay. Next is the mechanism of granuloma formation. Now, as I had told earlier in the very first line, that TB is a communicable chronic granulomatous disease. Now, granulomatous disease is there, that means there will be formation of granuloma. That is why the reason we are calling it as a granulomatous disease. Now, what is the mechanism of formation of this granuloma? So we have to remember that there is two series of stages or two steps or two process that takes place in the formation of granuloma. That is before the activation of CMI or the cell-mediated immunity, and after this CMI has been activated, and the subsequent steps and the consequences of activation of CMI. So if we see before the activation of CMI, what happens? That is after the infection, but before the activation of CMI, what happens is that the macrophages in our body, the macrophages that are present, they will be phagocytosing the micro that are entering our body. After these macrophages, they are phagocytosing these mycobacteria. These mycobacteria starts to proliferate within the macrophages that phagocytose those mycobacteria. This much is clear. Next, what happens is that now the cell-mediated immunity gets initiated, and the ultimate and the further consequences that take place. What happens is that the antigen presenting cells, they will process those microbacterial antigens that have been ingested by the macrophages, and then these processed antigens will be presented by antigen presenting cells to CD4 T cells. Now these CD4 T cells, when they see that antigen presenting cells are presenting these processed antigens to CD4 T cells, they at that very moment the CD4 T cells will differentiate into T helper cells, and then there will be formation of granuloma, and ultimately there will be formation of granuloma. Okay, now moving on to the next part, that is the primary and the secondary TB, obviously of the lungs. Now, primary and the secondary TB can be clinically or pathologically distinguished on the basis of following points. In this box, we can see clearly that primary TB has been differentiated from secondary TB. Now, on what basis they have been differentiated? Primary TB, if we see, is initial infection in an unsensitized individual, that is, a person who had been infected with TB for the first time. That will be called as a primary TB case. What will be called as a secondary TB case? If the infection has taken place in a previously sensitized individual, that is, a primary TB case is now getting a TB infection again, it will be called as a secondary TB infection. Okay, that will be called as secondary TB infection. Now, the source of infection, if we see, in primary TB, it is exogenous, that is, the infection it comes from outside. Whereas in secondary TB, as we had as I have told just few minutes earlier that it is the primary TB case. Now they are getting the secondary TB case, becoming secondary TB. That is, the infection was present inside the body. They were in a latent stage. Now, due to immunosuppression or any such reasons, they have got activated. So the infection is endogenous, that is present inside the body on the individual only, and they have been activated and leading to secondary TB case. Now, side of the lung involved, if you see both the primary and secondary TB, it is the upper lobe or the lower part of the upper lobe and upper part of the lower lobe. More commonly, we can see the upper lobe, which is most commonly involved. What is the reason for choosing this upper lobe by the mycobacteria for the infection to spread? Reason is that the upper part of the lung is such a place, the upper lobes of the lung is such a place where there is high oxygen concentration but very less perfusion. So what is the benefit? Mycobacteria will grow in such places where this oxygen concentration is very high and simultaneously where the immune system reach of the immune system will be less. So upper lobe, there is less perfusion, that is less blood flow. So less amount of macrophages will be able to reach there, less chances of activation of CMI. So upper lobe is a very much favorite place for this mycobacterium. If it's the regional lymph node involvement, in case of primary TB, there is significant and prominent involvement of the regional lymph nodes. In case of secondary TB, there is not so such prominent involvement of the regional lymph nodes. If it is sputum for the AFB, in case of primary TB, they will be rarely positive, whereas secondary TB, they are commonly positive. Cavity formation, rarely seen in primary TB, and it is very much commonly seen in secondary TB. If you see the healing in case of primary TB is mainly by calcification. That is, healing takes place by calcification. Whereas in case of secondary TB, it is by fibrosis. That is the place where the secondary TB takes place. There is fibrosis. This takes place. That place becomes fibrosed. Okay. The extrapulmonary complications in case of pulmonary TB, in case of primary TB, mainly the lungs are involved. So very commonly from there is chances of being spread to the other organs also, leading to extrapulmonary complications. Whereas in case of secondary TB, lesion usually is localized to the lung. Latent stage was present in the lung. From the infection spread inside the lungs only, infection is confined usually. Now coming on to the clinical features, there are these very important clinical features on the basis of which TB can be differentiated from other such cases where there is fever, where there is malaise, anorexia, weight loss. Okay. Now, in case of pulmonary TB, the clinical features are there can be several non-specific symptoms, and there are several specific symptoms. Non-specific symptoms includes malaise, anorexia, weight loss, and there will be fever. Now, in this fever part, fever it is in case of TB, the fever it is a very specific type of fever it takes place. A very specific type of fever that takes place in this case of TB. Now, what is the specific type of fever? Fever it is low grade, which is remittent. It will appear late each afternoon and then it will subside. And this is called as evening rise of temperature. The fever usually appears late each afternoon and then it subsides as the day or the night approaches. So it is called as evening rise of temperature. In evening time, there will rise of temperature. And there will be night sweats, which is sweating at the night time. Sputum, it is first mucus like, there is mucoid, and then it becomes pus like, there is purulent. Hemoptysis. This is a very, very common feature seen in almost all TB patients. Mostly TB patients show this feature, that is hemoptysis. Now, this hemoptysis is very more important MCQ, which is being framed from this point, that is, which is the commonly artery involved in hemoptysis. It is a bronchial artery involvement leads to hemoptysis. Now, in regards with hemoptysis, there is a very important quotation by Sir William Boyd. What he says that hemoptysis is the beginning of end or end of the beginning. Hemoptysis is the beginning of end or end of the beginning. What does this mean now? If a person is showing hemoptysis features, that means there is the person has already been progressed to in that person TB features or TB symptoms or risk of TB has moved to a certain this trend or moved to such extent that it has become a very much concerning factor. Okay, so hemoptysis is a very much important feature in case of TB. Now, extrapulmonary manifestations, there are certain extrapulmonary manifestations like if the bones are involved, if because of POTS disease, there will be cold abscess, there will be uh, compression of the spinal cord leading to paresthesia. There will be certain other features. But if we see that, if we try to see the organ which is being involved, on the basis of the organ involved, the extrapulmonary manifestations will be seen. With this, I come to an end of the introduction on TB. Hope you have all liked the video. If you have liked the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the further videos, I'm going to discuss about how to diagnose a case of TB. And in the further video and the next upcoming video, I'll be telling you what are the latest guidelines as are being laid down by Indian medical organizations or the two World Health organizations. Okay. Thank you everyone. Study well. Goodbye.